Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar presented by the LTO program. And we're very pleased to welcome a special guest today, Phil Goodwin from IDC. And Phil's going to be talking about tape in the cloud and some of the ways that those technologies can work together.
Very good. Thank you very much, Eric. And it really is a pleasure to be with everyone this morning. Tape is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I've been working in the storage industry for a long time. Tape has been a huge part of that. And the interesting thing is that tape has really made a very strong resurgence over the last few years, partially driven by malware, but interestingly enough, driven by the cloud. Cloud has, in many ways, given additional use cases and more work for tape. And so I chose to title today's talk as Tape and Cloud, Coffee and Cream, because the two really do go very well together. It's not a case of where you have to choose one or the other, definitely not an either or. In many cases, it's an and. And what I want to talk to you about today is really how to optimize the use of both technologies in a data protection scenario. To really kick things off, I really want to talk a little bit about some IDC research. I'm going to give you some data points, talk about the global data sphere and what we're seeing at a higher level. I'll talk about some of the key use cases that we've seen tape take over in the last few years. We'll talk about why tape is a primary defense against malware and ransomware. And many organizations are learning that tape in many cases is the last most certain line of defense when thwarting ransomware or recovering from an attack. Some of the research that we're finding is that 60% of organizations now have a digital transformation strategy in place. And in about half of those cases, data protection is a key component of that digital transformation and consumes about 30% of the budget. So it's really a huge part. And if you think about it, you really can't become a data-driven organization without complete access to data. So it really is a big part of it. We've also found through a recent study that we did that 90% of organizations expect to use cloud for part of their data protection within the next 12 months. Doesn't mean everybody's moving wholesale to the cloud. In fact, we wouldn't necessarily even recommend that. But it really is an important part of cloud and folding that into your data protection strategy. And then the third data point is that 70% of CIOs claim to have a cloud-first strategy. And that really comes into the way we expect to see applications deployed in the coming years, which will drive a lot of the data protection requirements. So the issue here is how can tape and cloud be used and optimized for superior data protection? And I hope we're able to answer that question for you today. When we look at the global data sphere, really it's unabated growth. And the chart that you see in front of you is a chart that we put together to update our global data sphere numbers through 2025. Show you two things. The tall blue bar is the total amount of installed storage that we expect to see, and the smaller kind of yellow or lime green bar is the number of installed or of actual stored bytes. And you'll see by 2025, we expect 7.5 zettabytes of data to be stored in the data center, or data that IT organizations have to deal with. It's a very significant number. To put that in perspective, it was about 2.6 zettabytes in 2018, so almost a threefold increase within that 7-year period of time. If you do some quick back-of-the-envelope calculations, what you'll see here, we believe of that 7.5 zettabytes, about 40% is something that is going to have to be captured by the IT organization. Now, you can throw in your own assumptions here, and it may vary by organization, by industry, by region, and some other factors. And I think these are fairly conservative calculations, but I offer them as an estimate of what you as an IT leader are going to have to be dealing with. Of that, about 10% we estimate to be hot, meaning we expect it to be accessed within a week. Warm is anything that we expect to be accessed within 30 days, and then cold is anything that is not expected to be accessed within the next 30 days. And that comes out to about 2.25 zettabytes which would be logical tape for storage, logical data to be stored on tape. So there's really a tremendous, huge amount of data out there that is really a good candidate for using with tape technology. But there's another side to it, and that other side is the data that is requiring additional security. You can see here that by 2025, we expect that 75% of all data is going to require some kind of special handling. And that may be privacy data, it could be compliance-related data, custodial, which we call personally identifiable information, confidential information like trade secrets and so forth, and then lockdown information, high security stuff, financial transactions, HIPAA, classified information, so forth, that is going to require some kind of special handling. And we'll talk about some of the use cases, but IT organizations really can't treat data as one size fits all. That's probably the Captain Obvious moment of the whole presentation. But it really is going to require a significant amount of effort by IT organizations over the coming years in order to deal with simply the regulatory requirements and how you protect that data and how you assure that that data is treated appropriately. When you look at the strengths and weaknesses of the various technologies, when you look at mirrors and clones and synchronous replication, asynchronous replication, snapshots, you can see in varying degrees that all of them are susceptible in some way to malware. You can certainly configure systems in an appropriate way that you can introduce that air gap in a disk-based environment where replication is taking place. But it does require a specific architectural effort to do that. And so, something that organizations should do, but they need to understand that the inherent weaknesses of those capabilities compared to tape, which is inherently very strong against malware. For example, tapes usually have some mechanism built into them for worm capabilities, built into the cartridge, where the data is immutable, can't be changed. Also, when you take it offline, then obviously it can't be accessed by a malware application and so forth. So tape is incredibly strong in that environment, and we believe it continues to be a key use case, and one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier that tape has become such a resurgent technology in the recent years. Some of the key use cases include things like recovering large volumes of data, and this is in particular comparison to the cloud. And we're going to talk more about this, but if you need to recover large volumes of data, and by large volumes I mean hundreds of terabytes or petabytes, many organizations are at that scale today. If you contemplate trying to recover that data off the cloud, it's very difficult. For example, a single LTO-8 Gen 8 tape throughput per second. A 1 gigabit link gives you 125 megabits per second. So a single tape drive can go 5 times faster than a single 1 gig link. And of course, tape can be multi-streamed with multiple drives through multiple channels back onto disk. So the restore speeds are highly scalable and can be very rapidly, or it can be used very rapidly to bring back very large volumes of data, which is something that can be problematic in the cloud. The second is backup operations, again introducing that air gap to thwart malware. The third is addressing lockdown storage requirements. And as I said earlier, we believe 75% of data is going to have to require some kind of special security. And tape has a lot of technology built into it specifically for that, such as encryption, such as worm capability, such as the ability to put it in a specific environment to avoid access and so forth. The fourth use case is really very low long-term dollars per gigabyte, and I'm going to give an example in a little bit of how that can be a significant cost advantage even when you're talking about the cloud. And when you start to do the math, if you need to store data for long periods of time, you'll find that tape really can't be beat in terms of a cost-effective solution relative to that. And then the fifth is the worm capability, again, where data can be immutable to any kind of change. Now I have 5 what I call hidden gotchas of cloud data protection. And the number one issue that I find is actually the number one inquiry that I have from IT organizations is how to back up data from SaaS applications. So in many cases, a SaaS application was purchased by a business unit, and that business unit owner was unaware of data protection requirements of the organization. I mean, you can't really expect them to be. But they just kind of assume that cloud applications are backed up, and they are, but that leads to the number 2 problem, which is the default backup schemes for most of these organizations are really minimal. In most cases, it's a 24-hour RPO and a 30-day retention. I say that in light of some of the largest SaaS applications that are out there. And what happens is suddenly the organization, usually when they try to recover data, discovers that the data is not available, and they suddenly call in the IT organization and say, hey guys, we got to do something here. And the IT organizations sometimes will call us and say, who do you know that can back up these SaaS applications? So that is a frequent inquiry that I get. Also, when it comes to restoring those SLAs, even if the SaaS vendor has that data there, sometimes that SLA is measured in days or weeks. I know in some cases where the SLA is 6 weeks. So you better not need to get to that data very quickly if you have it stored with one of those SaaS vendors. And then the fourth is assuming that clouds never experience outages. Some people think they don't have to back up in the cloud. If they put the application in the cloud, they don't have to worry about it because they look at the vendor claims about 15 nines of availability and so forth. But we all know, we've all read the stories and probably experienced some of the outages associated with some of the large SaaS applications, as well as some cloud locations that have gone down completely. And then also you cannot assume that clouds are invulnerable to malware attack. They certainly are. They're going to go through your front door, your back door, whatever it is to get to your data regardless of where it is. So those are some things that I think organizations need to be aware of when they're talking about cloud data protection. Then the other industry little secret that I kind of alluded to a moment ago is that behind that opaque curtain of cloud is many cloud hyperscalers are now using tape behind it. In fact, I know anecdotally of at least one that recently purchased, I think it was like 1,800 tape libraries. So they are putting in huge numbers of tape drives. And the reason is they've discovered the economics. For them to store data for long periods of time in an archive environment, when you can shave pennies per gigabyte or even tenths of pennies per gigabyte off of petabytes of storage, that's a significant amount of money for these hyperscalers. And it's an economic play that they take advantage of, but it's also an economic play that IT organizations can continue to take advantage of. And the example I have here is the current list price for archive storage from one of the major vendors is 4/100ths of a penny per gigabyte, which comes out to about $4 per terabyte. But if you take a single LTO cartridge these days, a 30 terabyte cartridge, to store that amount of data in the cloud would cost about $120 a month. The cartridge itself costs about $65. So if you can move that data to your tape and store it very inexpensively, I mean, you don't have it, environmentals. I mean, yes, I understand they're tape libraries, but the data can be stored or the tapes can be stored on a rack or in a special room or whatever, very, very inexpensively. And so the bottom line here is that we're seeing a resurgence in tape among hyperscalers simply because they've now discovered the economic benefits of storing that very infrequently accessed data on tape. So let me summarize here. First of all, here's where we see the roles of tape in the cloud. Tape is perhaps, I think, the best technology and best position for thwarting malware and ransomware. When you have that data off on tape and it is physically inaccessible, it is safe. And what we're finding among many of the malware and ransomware vendors now is they attack the backup set first. They go in and they corrupt the backup set or encrypt it or whatever they do, and then they attack the primary systems. So that when organizations go to try to recover that data from their backups, the backup's already corrupted, and tape can help thwart that. Tape also helps meet data protection requirements at a cost that other technologies cannot, including the cloud. It's also well suited to protect data from specific classes of data that require special handling well into the 2020s. And LTO is an industry standard supported technology that has 4 generations, and I'll show those to you in just a moment. But it really has become the standard in the industry, throughout the industry, for almost all use cases. There's still some niche tape players out there, but it's a very, very small percentage of the total market. The vast majority of it is now LTO because it is supported by all of the major systems vendors, many of whom are here today to talk to you. They're all members of the LTO consortium, and so it has become an industry standard technology. The other thing that's good about it is it has a long roadmap. Right now we're on Gen 8, and we have specifications all the way through Gen 12. And you can see here that the capabilities of the technology just continues to get better and better. I would also mention that access to that data is also constantly improving. The advent of LTFS, linear tape file system, has given significantly faster access to data and better management of data through that file system. Finally, this is what I would offer to organizations who are considering using tape and cloud. Consider tape when you need an air gap for ransomware. Consider it when you need to store or to restore extremely large volumes of data. Tape is simply the fastest way of doing that. I would also consider it if you need to retain the data for more than 3 years. Those pennies per gigabyte per month charges simply add up, and if you're going to retain that data for more than 3 years, it's probably going to be far more economic for you to retain that data yourself on tape, because it does give the lowest dollar per gigabyte stored. And then also use it when confidential data cannot leave the premises. You can encrypt it, you can compress it, and make it very difficult for anyone to read it, even if they get a hold of it. However, consider cloud for applications where assured time to first byte is important. And there are some of those applications, and cloud can give that. As I said, LTFS is making some dramatic strides in that regard, but cloud is still probably better suited for that. Applications are also for cloud where online data analysis and searching may be required. Again, you can do some of that with tape, but it's probably a better application for cloud. Applications where data restore and access volumes is relatively small. If you're bringing back small amounts of data, individual files, tables, small databases, things like that, it may be the fastest way to do that, but again, in relatively small amounts.